Welcome to the AI Brief from the YPO Technology Network. I'm Stephen Forte. Something landed in the research literature this month that is the closest thing we have to an honest answer about whether any of this is working. Nearly 6,000 senior executives across 4 countries surveyed through 4 central banks asked not what they think of artificial intelligence, but what it has actually done to their own companies. Here is what you are getting in the next 10 minutes. The real adoption numbers, country by country, so you can locate your own business in them. The measured effect on productivity and employment, which is going to surprise you. The forecast those same executives made for the next 3 years, which appears to contradict the measurement and does not. And one diagnostic I would run on your own AI program before your next board meeting. The paper is called Firm Data on AI. It comes out of the National Bureau of Economic Research, the American body that publishes most of the serious economics you eventually read about in the newspaper. It is a working paper, which means it has not been through peer review. I will say that once and then stop apologizing for it, because the data collection here is better than anything peer review has produced on this question so far. Here is why. The authors did not build a survey and go hunting for executives to answer it. They borrowed 4 panels that already existed and bolted the same AI questions onto each one. In the United States, the survey of business uncertainty, run by the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. In the United Kingdom, the Decision Maker Panel, which is the Bank of England's standing survey of British business leaders. In Germany, the online panel of firms run by the Bundesbank, the German central bank. And in Australia, a monthly survey run out of Macquarie University in Sydney. Nearly 6,000 firms, 70 to 90% of the respondents are CEOs, CFOs, or senior management, depending on the country. Fieldwork ran from November of last year through January of this one. 2 details make this worth your time. The respondents are unpaid, which the authors treat as a design feature rather than a cost, because paid surveys of hard-to-reach professionals can run imposter rates as high as 80%. Somebody claiming to be a CFO in exchange for a gift card is generally not a CFO. And these panels have a track record, 10 years of their output and employment data track national GDP growth and private sector employment in both the United States and the United Kingdom. When you check what these executives predicted about their own sales and headcount a year ahead against what actually happened, the predictions line up. So this is not a poll of opinions. It is a validated, representative sample of senior operators with a documented forecasting record. It is, in other words, you. Adoption first, and find yourself in this list. In the United States, 78% of firms are currently using some form of AI. In the United Kingdom, 71. In Germany, 65. In Australia, 59. Across all 4, an average of 69%. Hold that spread lightly. It is a fact about adoption rates, not a league table of competence, and most of the gap is industry mix rather than ambition. What are they using it for? The most common single use at 41% of firms is text generation with large language models, writing things. Then data processing with machine learning and visual content creation, each around 30%. Image processing, 20%, robotics, 9%, autonomous vehicles, 3%. Now the number, more than 90% of these executives report no impact of AI on employment at their own firm over the past 3 years. 89% report no impact on labor productivity, which the survey measures as sales per employee. Only a small percentage report a positive productivity effect at all. 69% bought it. 89% cannot find it in the numbers. One more detail, which I will give you flat. More than 2/3 of these respondents, mostly CEOs, CFOs, and senior finance managers, personally use AI in a typical work week. Average usage, 1.5 hours, 90 minutes a week. Now you might reasonably decide that is the whole story. 69% adoption, 89% nothing, 90 minutes a week, and the emperor has no clothes. That is not what this paper says, and the next number is why. Asked to look forward 3 years, the same executives, the accurate ones, the ones with the record, predict that productivity at their firms rises 1.4% on average, output up 0.8%, employment down 0.7%, which the authors convert into roughly 1.75 million fewer jobs by 2028 across the four countries. American executives are the most bullish on productivity at 2.25%. Give the authors credit here, and I mean it. They wrote down their own limits. They note this measures expectations rather than outcomes. They note it excludes jobs created at firms that do not exist yet. They note they never asked about the second round employment effects of higher real incomes. That is a rare piece of intellectual honesty in a field where most people selling you a number about AI and jobs are selling you something else entirely. Then there is the split nobody expected. The same questions went to employees in the United States. Employees expect AI to raise employment at their firms by 0.5% over the next 3 years. Their employers expect it to cut employment by 0.7, same firms, same 3 years, opposite signs. Somewhere in your company right now, two people are planning for different decades and for scale on how unsettled the expert view is. One widely cited MIT estimate puts the total American productivity gain from AI at no more than 0.66% over 10 years. Goldman Sachs puts it at 1.5 percentage points per year over 10 years. That is roughly a 20-fold disagreement between serious people about the same quantity. 6,000 operators landed nearer the low end. So who does report an effect? And what did they actually do? TUI Group reported this morning, Europe's largest tour operator, German headquartered, running its own hotels, cruise ships, and aircraft. Their chief executive credited AI for efficiency gains, specifically in software development and in distribution, and described using large language models and social channels to cut the cost of acquiring a customer. Read the quarter before you get excited. Revenue was about 6 billion euros, down more than 5%. Underlying operating profit came in at 235 million euros against 321 million a year earlier, down roughly 27%, including a 20 million euro hit from the war in Iran affecting cruise ships in the Emirates. So the claim is not that AI grew their earnings. The claim is that AI is why a bad quarter was not a worse one. I find that more useful than a growth anecdote because it is testable against your own numbers. Bain surveyed 951 companies with revenue above 100 million US dollars across 9 sectors, finishing in April. Among the companies that actually measured their AI cost savings, 40% came in at 10% or less against expectations of up to 20%. And the number one reason those programs underperformed was not the models. It was that the companies could not reliably get at their own data. After what Bain describes as hundreds of billions of dollars of data modernization spending, then the detail that tells you where we are in the cycle. Of the companies whose AI investments missed expectations, 90% plan to increase their AI budget next year. 44% name the savings they did not achieve as a top funding source for the next round. Bain's own line on this is the best sentence written about enterprise AI this year. It sounds like discipline, they say, but in reality, it is a circular bet with a structural leak. One last piece of evidence from software engineering where measurement is easiest. A benchmarking firm called DX surveyed more than 500 organizations this quarter. More than half of all code is now AI generated, up from 34% 3 months earlier, and weekly output per engineer rose 37% over the past year. But the gains concentrated in organizations with fewer than 100 engineers. Large teams in traditional industries lagged, and the gap is widening. Being small is now an advantage. Sit with that, because it is not what any of us were told. Here is my read. The 89% is not evidence that AI does not work. It is evidence of where it has been pointed. The single most common deployment across 6,000 firms is text generation, and writing was never the bottleneck. Nothing that makes a document appear faster will ever show up in sales per employee, because that was not the constraint. We said something close to this a month ago when the finding was that your AI bottleneck was never the model. This is the measured version of the same sentence. Sales per employee moves when a queue gets shorter, and almost nobody has put AI on a queue, which is why the wins landed in the small companies. Not because they had better technology, they had the same technology, they had less process to renegotiate. A $40 million industrial supply distributor in Nairobi can change how quotes get produced in a fortnight because the person who owns the process sits 3 meters from the person who owns the company. A 12,000 person manufacturer takes 18 months to change the same thing, and somewhere in month 7, the pilot acquires a steering committee. If I were sitting in your seat this week, I would run one check, and it is not an inventory. Take the single number your board already tracks that would move if AI were working. Revenue per employee, cost to serve, days to close, claims per adjuster, quotes out the door per week. Pick the real one, the one that gets argued about. Then ask whether any AI you have deployed touches the process that produces it, not adjacent to it, touches it. If the answer is no, you are in the 89% by construction, and buying more of it will not move you out. If the answer is yes and the number still has not moved, then you have a measurement problem rather than a technology problem, and that is a much better problem because you can fix it this quarter. 69% of the firms in that survey bought the technology. A small percentage rebuilt something around it. Only the second group shows up in the numbers: adoption as a purchase, productivity as a redesign. That is the YPO Tech Network AI brief for Thursday, August 13th. I am Stephen Forte. If this was useful, send it to a fellow member. I will be back Friday with more. Until then, stay sharp.